Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm so excited to be here today with Rudy Ruiz. Rudy, welcome back to Must Read Fiction.
Hi, Erin. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to talk now about a second book. A little bit about Rudy Ruiz. He is a writer of literary fiction, essays, and political commentary. His fiction debut was the short story collection Seven for the Revolution, which won 4 International Latino Book Awards. His previous novel is The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, which was named one of the top 10 best first novels of 2020 by the American Library Association's book list. His newest novel is Valley of Shadows, and we are going to talk about Valley of Shadows today. So let's start there. Please tell me about Valley of Shadows.
Thank you, Erin. Thanks for the introduction. Valley of Shadows. I've got it right here, so you can check it out.
Beautiful. Oh my
It's
gosh, is it like reflective? It's yeah, that's so
right.
beautiful.
Blackstone Publishing did a nice job on that design and on the printing. But it's basically historical literary fiction. It's set in the 1880s, late 19th century in West Texas and northern Mexico. And it follows this Mexican lawman, Solitario Cisneros, and kind of tells his story. And he is a complicated character who has, when the story opens up, he has lost his badge, he has lost his country, and he has lost his beloved wife. So he's kind of really shut down, and he's living in seclusion and isolation on his ranch in West Texas. And when I say he lost his country, it's because the Rio Grande shifted course, as it actually has several times in history. And the town that he lived in and his land were on the Mexican side of the border. But once the Rio Grande shifts course, they end up stranded on the U.S. side of the border in Texas. And so he's basically, like I said, just living in isolation and seclusion. He's kind of given up on life, and he's sort of afraid of re-engaging with the world, in part because he believes he is carrying this family curse that dooms anyone that he loves. And so he kind of keeps to himself and just speaks to his horses and his cows and to the spirits as well, because this is a magical realism novel. But when the book does open up, it is a mystery, and it is somewhat of a thriller slash horror novel, and it opens up with a series of crimes that the local townspeople in this town out in West Texas recruit Solitario out of retirement to kind of help them put a stop to these murders and find the perpetrators. And so that kind of launches us into the story. And obviously, as you can imagine, he's battling not just these horrific, criminals that are committing these crimes, but he's also battling his own internal demons as he's forced out of his home and out of the comfort and safety of his ranch where he's been hiding.
Oh, fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. What a compelling premise for a story. And yeah, and it's so interesting, kind of it's set over 100 years ago in the late 1800s. And so I'm curious, that definitely leads to my next question, which is what did you learn about writing historical fiction set in that time period? And is there parts about that research and that writing that you did that feels remarkably relevant today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I never thought I would write historical fiction, and I never thought I would write horror or mystery. And it was a lot of fun, really. I've got to tell you, it was very immersive, exciting. The research was fascinating. I learned things about Texas and the border region and Mexican history as well that I had never learned. I had just not studied it, or it had not been taught in classrooms and that I grew up in. So it was eye opening. It was fascinating, really easy to go down those rabbit holes of research. Um, Fascinating, kind of learned about some terrible atrocities in history as well. And I think of how it kind of related. I found it when I was writing the novel. It was during the pandemic, and it was also the time when the Black Lives Matter, protests were going on around the country. The George Floyd tragedy, had taken place, and so I found that there were so many things in common that, sadly, having to do with social injustice that sadly still persists today. Racially motivated, like hate crimes, people being displaced from their homes, immigrant, conflicts due to the, border regions kind of strategic position, and people kind of fighting over control of it. So a lot of those things just seem very relevant today. One of the historical events that I learned about when I was doing my research was the Porvenir massacre, 1918, that took place in Texas, in a small town out in the west, in the desert. And that event kind of inspired me to think about what how might history have been different had there been more people of color in positions of authority or power, to help shape the course of history, and make it a little bit more balanced. And the Puerto Rican massacre, was an event where, 15 Mexican and Mexican American boys and young men were rounded up and accused of stealing cattle in the small town of Porvenir, and without any kind of due diligence, or justice, they were executed by Texas Rangers, and U.S. cavalry. So then their families basically were terrified, and they ran away and went back across the border to Mexico, and fled, and left their possessions, their land, whatever they had behind, and which may have been partially part of the motivation for what happened, because sadly, no evidence was ever presented that a crime had actually been committed. So it took 100 years for the state of Texas to actually acknowledge this massacre. It wasn't until 100 years later, in 2018, that the state acknowledged it and erected a historical marker out in West Texas to, I guess, memorialize this event. So, and it was really due to families of those people that died, descendants of them, who kind of advocated for years and years to have them acknowledged. So that inspired part of the book, and there's actually some scenes in the book that kind of relate to that and kind of imagine. I'm an optimistic, positive person, so I kind of like to look at these problems and try to think, how could how could they have been made better, or how could they be made better in the future? And I think that's how it relates to today, really.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. And fascinating to think about that and to see the 100 years as it is getting officially recognized. And yeah, and fascinating to imagine how it could have been different. So this book has got some horror in it, but maybe a future book could be like a revisionist history. Maybe there are people of color on councils, and maybe what would that change?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I did think of it almost as a little, baby step into that kind of alternate reality or alternate history, as you mentioned, because um, the stuff that goes on in the book, like, it probably would not have happened back then. Some of that stuff would not have happened because there wasn't a lawman like Solitario Cisneros, and he is partnered with a couple of different people, both living and dead, that work with him in trying to solve this crime. And one of the ones that I found very enjoyable to write for, and it turned out to be a surprise, I think, hero in the book, was this Native American, Mexican slash Apache woman, who is named Onawa, and she ends up being, key partner in him and his kind of journey to both grow as a person, but also to solve this mystery and bring the perpetrators to justice. Um, so yeah, I don't think a lot of this kind of stuff happened in real life, but you know, that's why I like to write fiction.
Yeah, that is one of the best parts about fiction. Yeah, and you totally actually anticipated my next question, which is, as you're writing Solitario and Onawa, yeah, you mentioned that Onawa surprised you by, kind of being a bigger character than maybe you thought she would be. But yeah, how did writing Solitario, Onawa, some of the other characters, what other surprises, what did they do that you weren't expecting? And what did you learn from writing their stories?
Well, for me, Onawa was a big surprise, and a lot of people who've read the book and then who I've talked to have told me that they loved her character and really kind of connected with her, and loved her both. both her energy and her optimism, but also her, when kind of her ability to push back, especially against these male authority figures, the patriarchy, if you will, that she was having to sort of deal with, both in her own family, her father, an Apache form, kind of elder, the Anglo men that kind of ruled the town after it's become a U.S. town, and then Solitario, who's kind of a macho Mexican American, old school kind of guy as you would expect in that time, but he also has an open mind, and he, in several ways, owes her his life. So he is very, kind of patient and receptive with her, whereas he might not have been with other people. I just found her fascinating because it was dealing with not only cultural issues but also gender issues, and she really just emerged as a strong heroine, and I just loved it. I loved it when she would kind of push back against Solitario or some of the other male characters, and had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with it. With Solitario, I think it was an interesting, very pandemic inspired writing process, because I think that without the pandemic isolation that we all experienced, I don't think I would have been able to as much relate to the depth of isolation and loneliness and solitude that this character was battling with, and the anxiety, that he faced in trying to re-engage with the world, which, as we all know, a lot of people, young and old, have dealt with increased anxiety over the last couple of years as we've tried to get back to a new normal. And so that, I think, for me as a writer, you always end up, I guess, kind of using your writing as self therapy. It was kind of a therapeutic process, to write his character, and that was surprising as well, but helpful.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for saying that too, because especially as a reader, like, it's sometimes it's safer to like process your own pandemic experience, through the 1880s, right? So you can be like,
Right?
oh yeah, those things were really hard for me specifically, but now I can like sort of do that from a distance and at arm's length. So yeah,
It's a little safer.
yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And that brings me to my last question, which was when we spoke last, we were talking about your first novel, The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, which did come out during the pandemic. And so, how has it felt to have that book in the world, and now Valley of Shadows? So, and how do you hope that people will receive Valley of Shadows?
Well, it's been really exciting because Valley of Shadows, I never really thought, uh, when I wrote The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, I never thought about writing another novel like in the same sort of universe, if you will. And then it just kind of happened. Valley of Shadows, I set it in the same sort of magical realist border universe, but it's more of an independent, a standalone prequel to The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, in that the protagonist, Solitario Cisneros, is basically like an ancestor of Fulgencio's. He's from the same lands, the same ranch lands along the Rio Grande on the border, and it's just further back in time. And it's actually when, if I know you read Fulgencio, but the curse that plagued Fulgencio is the same curse that plagues Solitario, except when he was born, when Solitario was born, was when the curse was, I guess, cast, if you will. And so this kind of goes back and explores all that sort of ancient history that I kind of touched on in Fulgencio, and I go deeper into it in Valley of Shadows, and that was a lot of fun because, um, again, I think it gets into the area of trying to understand ourselves and multi-generational kind of traumas that may exist in our families that sort of get either forgotten or swept under the rug, but still haunt us as families or as individuals. Um, and so I think that was an interesting aspect of writing the novel. Having both books out there together for me is really exciting because I always have loved authors that sort of create these worlds that you can get lost in and feel that you really are immersed in those worlds. And so adding, having now two books set in this world, I think the world of La Frontera, as I call it, the border, um, I think it's exciting, and I hope readers find it so, and I hope that eventually I'll write another book in that same universe again. I don't know exactly what it'll be about, but I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, certainly our world is better because the resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez and Valley of Shadows is in it. So thank you. Thank you for continuing to
Thank
explore
you.
that world, for writing Valley of Shadows, and for taking the time to speak with me today. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Erin. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.